Hello! So, I just started the Alloy of Law, the first book of Mistborn Era 2. And I sort of prevaricated for a while about how I was going to do these books because the Mistborn Era 2 books are shorter than any other Sanderson book that I've read so far, and they also aren't conveniently divided into parts. So, my first thought was that I would maybe just do like a single video per book. Um, but I didn't really want to do that because sort of the basic concept of my channel is that I don't do like reviews of a whole book. I sort of give my thoughts live as I'm going through a book. Like as I'm going through a book, I react in real time essentially, and uh, you get to see that rather than only seeing my thoughts after I finish a book. Um, so I didn't want to do the whole book in one video because I felt like that would be a bit off-brand, essentially. Um, so the way I'm going to be doing these, at least for now, is I'm going to be doing 2 videos per book. And this first video covers the first half of the book, so chapters 1 through 10, because there's 20 chapters in the book. And then I'm going to read the second half and do a second video. We'll see if that works out. Let me know down below if this works. If this doesn't feel too artificial, I guess. Because it's not really like it's not like a Stormlight book, for example, where the book comes with these like pre-made holes that I can separate it into. Anyway, there's 2 layers to this book so far that I want to talk about. One is the book as a story of its own, and 2 is the book as a sequel to the original Mistborn trilogy. And it's kind of interesting because this is not your classic sequel so far, in the sense that I don't think the plot of this book is going to have much, if anything, to really do with the plot of Mistborn Era 1. But the world building of this book is incredibly related to Mistborn Era 1, for obvious reasons given how Mistborn Era 1 ended. So, for the record, this is going to be full spoilers for Era 1. So, I'm going to talk about that aspect first, the world building of this and how the world has changed since Mistborn Era 1, and how I feel about some of those changes. Like there's some really cool stuff here, and then there's some kind of weird stuff here. So apparently, when Sazed became God, he changed how the magic system works, like on a fundamental level. There are no longer any Mistborn. There are only Mistings, and they're not even called Mistings because there's no Mistborn to differentiate them from. They're just like all Allomancers just have one metal. Which I like. I feel like the original trilogy got a little bit too comfortable with all of its major characters being Mistborn, and I feel like having like sort of dialing back the power levels is a good idea. But here's where things get interesting, because in addition to people being able to only have one allomantic power, there's also a lot of Feruchemists around, but they also only have one power, which isn't how Feruchemy ever worked before. Like, Feruchemy was not like Allomancy, where most people only had one. Like, if you were a Feruchemist, you had access to all of Feruchemy. But that's apparently not the case anymore. Apparently now there are people who just have one feruchemical power, and that's all. Like, there aren't people who have more than one, apparently. And also, people can be both an Allomancer and a Feruchemist at the same time. Which is really wild to me, because, like, the idea, the very concept of someone being an Allomancer and a Feruchemist at the same time was a massive deal in the original trilogy. Like, that's the thing that made the Lord Ruler the Lord Ruler. He was literally immortal because he was those two things at the same time. But I suppose that's really only the case if you're like a full Mistborn and a full Feruchemist at the same time. When you just have one power from each, that's not gonna give you that kind of advantage, really. That said, there is a character here mentioned, named Miles, and I believe he's mentioned as being, he's called Miles 100 Lives, I believe. And Wax says at one point in this book that Miles wouldn't have died to a mere shot to the head, which to me seems to imply that Miles might have the specific combination of allomantic and feruchemical abilities that allows him to be effectively unkillable, like the Lord Ruler was. So that would be being able to store health and being able to burn whichever metal it is that stores health, I think. I'm a bit unclear on how the Lord Ruler's immortality worked. It's been a while since I've read Mistborn 1. The first book, I mean, where that was sort of covered, but I think that was the trick. Anyway, I'm so used to everyone being a Mistborn that it actually took me a while to realize that Wax only has steel pushing. Like I was reading the first chapter, and there was like an action scene, and he was doing a bunch of steel pushing, and I was actually thinking, like, why isn't he using anything else? Like, it would certainly be useful if he burned some pewter right now, or like tin. Like, why isn't he doing that? And then I was like, oh wait, that's not a thing everyone can do. That was just Vin. I'm just so used to her. And that's why I think it's good that Mistborn have basically been retconned out of existence, because like, I feel like the existence of people like Vin sort of overshadowed regular Mistings in the story. What else is going on here? So, there are still mists, but they're not there every night. They're only there on some nights. And I wonder what's up with that, because I thought that the mists should have disappeared entirely when Vin and then Sazed took all of Preservation's power into themselves. Because the mists are essentially Preservation's, like, the remains of Preservation. Like, that's where Preservation's power lives, in the mists. So when Vin and then Sazed, like, took that power for themselves, shouldn't the mists have disappeared forever? I'm sure we'll learn more about that as we go forward. What else? I really like the way that Allomancy and Feruchemy have been seamlessly integrated into this society. Like, the society is clearly, the world building is done in such a way that it makes perfect sense that this is what a world where these things are relatively common would be like. That, like, people wear literal tinfoil hats to protect themselves from people pushing or pulling on their emotions. People use certain professions are heavily associated with certain powers because those powers make that profession easier and stuff like that. It's nice. It's nice world building. There's also a bunch of religions, which are all tied to characters from the original trilogy, which in any other world, I would think that was a bit cheesy. Like the idea of like, oh, the main characters from the previous series are all like they're the only historical figures who matter in this time. That's a bit fan servicey. But here it makes sense because of course what happened at the end of the last book was literally the world got destroyed and made anew, and that's such a huge event that changes the course of history forever, that of course anyone involved with that becomes a figure of legend. So one thing that's interesting is that even though there are cities and places named after these characters, like the main city is named Elendel after Elend, but despite that, none of the characters from the original trilogy are ever referred to by their names. Vin is the Ascendant Warrior. Marsh is... Well, I'm not sure about Marsh. Like, there's a character called, I think, Iron Eyes, or at least is referred to as Iron Eyes, but it's kind of talked about as though Iron Eyes is supposed to be death. And I think that's Marsh, but I'm not sure if people are aware that he's a historical figure, or if they think he's like just a personification of death. In this culture. But Vin is definitely treated as a historical figure. Elend, I can't remember what he was called. Something Emperor, the Last Emperor, something like that. Of course, Kelsier is the survivor still. And the thing I wonder is, so we have the survivorists, such as Steris in this story, who obviously worship Kelsier. We have pathists, such as Wax, who worship Sazed, or Harmony, as he's known now. And there's also Sliverism, which is tied to, I believe, Marsh. That one's we've got the least information on so far, so I'm not sure what's going on there. What I'm wondering is, does Vin have her own religion? Or is she still just associated with Kelsier? Like, is she still, like, religiously the heir of the survivor? Or is there a special religion about the Ascendant Warrior? I mainly ask because I feel like Vin would absolutely hate that if she had her own religion, and I would find that very funny. And I also think she would literally kill someone who told her that she is a model for self-actualized women, which is how Marasi describes her at one point, which was very funny. Another interesting world building tidbit I noticed was a character is described as having Koloss blood. I don't like what that implies, Brandon. How'd that happen? What happened there? What? Don't like the implications of that one. Don't want to think about that. No. Okay. So, finally on the world building front, I just want to say there are some things I take a bit of issue with, which is that some of the world building is a bit... feels like more should have changed. Specifically, I find it very weird that we still have noble houses after everything that went on in Era 1, and especially that we still have the same noble houses. Ladrian, Tekiel, etc. Like, these are the same noble families that were part of the Lord Ruler's regime. Why are they still there? Like, why are they still in charge of society? What's going on? Like, that might be explained. It might be explained later on or something, but so far it feels really off to me. And not even like a weird political statement, but just like a like just something that Brandon kind of overlooked, I guess, which is that there is no way that these same families would still be allowed to remain in power after what happened in Era 1. Surely. If nothing else, surely Sazed would have made sure that they weren't. Or actually the Lord Mistborn, who I think is supposed to be Spook. Like Spook, who was apparently in charge of this society immediately after the world was reborn. Surely Spook wouldn't have let this happen. Like, Spook doesn't love nobles. Exactly, I think. I mean, sure, he was probably married to one, but like, I don't think this quite works for me. And the other detail that doesn't work for me is at one point Wax talks about the main precepts of pathism as a religion. And most of them are like your bog standard, be kind to others, yada yada yada, like bog standard religious commandment stuff. And then one of them is, do not seek lust without commitment. So, like, I guess don't have premarital sex? Which, okay, Brandon, like, I know you believe that, but it doesn't quite strike me as something that Sazed would prioritize to the extent that he would enshrine it as one of the core precepts of his religion. Like, that just feels a bit forced to me. Like, not necessarily forced, like, but maybe, like, Brandon assumes that, I guess, every religion would have that? Because the context in which these are listed is, like, essentially kind of saying, like, oh, you know, pathism doesn't really have any specific precepts, it's just got all these generic ones. But, like, that's not actually that generic as it might seem. Like, sure, a lot of religions have that, but a lot also don't. Like, it's a very Western cultural cultural norm, I would say. Not all cultures have that particular norm. So it strikes me as weird that that's sort of presented as like this default aspect that, like, surely any religion would have this thing in it. Now, I don't necessarily know if that's something that Sazed himself wrote down for the people, or if it's something that, like, got added afterwards, essentially, by his worshippers. That might be clarified. Like, if it's something that other people who are not Sazed, like, sort of put in his mouth after the fact, that would be interesting. I would actually like that. That would be a really interesting plot twist. If all of these, if Sazed actually did not want to leave any advice for people, and then normal people made up stuff and put it in his mouth, essentially. That would be a fun twist. But if that's not the case, I find this particular line weird. The do not seek lust without commitment. But okay, I've talked so much about the Era 1 nonsense and, like, the connectivity between the two eras that I haven't even touched on the actual plot of this book. And I feel really bad, because I feel like this series, Era 2, lives in the shadow of Era 1 very much. In that people just seem to prefer Era 1 a lot. And I don't want to do that, but I had to talk about this stuff for a while first. So from this point on, I'm going to be talking about the actual characters of this book and the events of this book. But it's a bit difficult to talk about that because this book is so short, and so in this first half of the book, not that much has happened yet. But I will say, I love Wayne. Wayne might be my favorite non-Stormlight Sanderson character already. it's hard to match up to Shallan, Kaladin, and Dalinar from Way of Kings, because those are some of the best developed and characterized characters I've ever read in fantasy. But Wayne is already fascinating to me. I love him. I love his tragic backstory. I love his personality. I love his sense of humor. Everything about him is great. Wax is... he's growing on me. I didn't love him at first. I didn't love the whole fridging his wife thing at the start. Not a big fan of that particular trope. But I feel like here it was done decently respectfully, in that Lessie was sort of given some characterization before she died, and was sort of like she's more than just a prop, I guess, in his life, at least for the brief chapter that she existed. I do hope we get more of Lessie going forward. I do hope we get like flashbacks to their life together and sort of flesh out her character a bit more. But Wax himself is okay. He's different than your typical protagonist because he's older and he's sort of in a very unique position socially and in life that I find is something that isn't covered usually in fantasy. So just for that reason alone, he is interesting to read about, because it's just a very different character than what we usually get in fantasy. But so far, I'm not like super attached to him as a character the way I am to Wayne. And Marasi to an extent. I really like Marasi as well. Marasi is fun. There's some gender stuff going on here again. With Marasi. Like, she has her whole like, oh, I don't want to put on trousers like Vin and fight people. I want to wear a dress. And that's fine, but it's also kind of hilarious because that was also Vin's thing. Like, Vin also had that whole, like, oh, but I kind of like being feminine and wearing a dress thing. I feel like it's a bit weird to be like, I don't want to be like Vin, I want to be like Vin. That could be commentary on how Vin is remembered in, like, only one element of her personality and the other side of her has been forgotten. Like, that could be purposeful commentary. But if not, it's just a really funny, like paradox, I guess. Not paradox, that's the wrong word. Oxymoron? Contradiction? I don't know. Anyway, Marasi is fun to read about. We still don't have a ton of deep characterization for her. Really, the person with the most characterization at this point is still Wayne, which is hilarious because he's had like one point of view chapter so far. But that was the best chapter, the one where he tricks his way into the police station and then tricks one of the suspects into giving him information. That was my favorite chapter of this book so far. So yeah, the main cast so far, I'm assuming these three are going to be essentially the main cast. The main cast so far is very fun. More consistently fun than the main cast of Mistborn Era 1, I will say. Like, in Mistborn Era 1, there were compelling characters, but there were also some I didn't like. Elend was never really my favorite. I didn't like resonate with Elend a lot. And here, at least so far, all three of the major characters are enjoyable enough, and I think I'll like reading about them. And also the writing has improved so much. Like, the writing is very good. Sanderson is at the top of his game. The quips and humor feel a bit Marvel Cinematic Universe at times. Like, there's a few moments where I was like, do we really need this many, like, do we need this, like, level of jokes at all times? I enjoy it when it's Wayne, because it's in character for Wayne to be like that. But sometimes it feels like there's just like all the characters are quipping a bit too consistently for me. But that might just be because I'm coming to this straight from Stormlight, which is the most humorless of the books so far. Like, Stormlight is very serious. And it might be because I just, I tend to like sometimes a very serious tone in my fantasy. But I also do like the humor. Like, it's not bad humor. I just sometimes feel like there might be a bit too much of it. So that's it for the characters, that's it for the writing, and finally the plot. The plot so far is is not that complicated, it's fairly basic, and perhaps most interestingly for me, it's a very low stakes plot. I mean, it's high stakes for the characters, their lives are in danger, but it's low stakes for the world. Like, so far, there is no epic, world-threatening evil in this story. And I like that. I always appreciate when a fantasy story is willing to dial down the threat level a bit. One of the issues I have with, since you already mentioned it, one of the issues I have with the Marvel movies is that every single one has to be a world-threatening event. And that just gets tiresome. And the Cosmere has done a good job so far, I think, of having different levels of threat. So Mistborn Era 1 was like top level, extreme, epic level threats to the world. And Stormlight is probably going to be that too, going forward, but Stormlight Book 1 wasn't that. Stormlight Book 1 was very much focused on individual characters and their fates. And Elantris and Warbreaker, for all my problems with those books, were kind of enjoyable because they were focused on the fates of individual countries. Like no matter what happened in Elantris and Warbreaker, no matter how the plot played out, the majority of the world would have stayed the same. Like no grand epic changes to the whole world were on the table, like whether our main characters succeeded or failed in either of those books, which I liked. And I feel like this story is going to be even more like that, like even smaller scale, which I'm enjoying so far. And we'll see if the book is long enough, because really I feel like it's weird that I'm already at the halfway point because not that much has happened yet. I'm hoping that I don't come away from these books feeling like they're too short, which is how I felt about Warbreaker, and these are even shorter. But so far, I think this has potential. The Era 2 has potential to be more enjoyable for me personally, maybe, than Era 1. And I love Era 1. So I'm really looking forward to reading the rest of these, and hoping that they keep up the level of quality so far. Okay, I'm gonna go back to reading the rest of this book. I've talked way too long considering how short of a portion of the book this is, but I had to get all that, like, world building stuff off my chest first, I guess. Okay, see you next time!